Mango Thunderslice, and today's video is AGW, sorting out the climate cult in 2020 as California rages in a towering inferno, or something of the sort. Of course, it's not just California that's burning. Many other states, pretty much the entire west half of the United States, North America in general, is covered in smoke to some degree. And, at the same time, we got two hurricanes at the same time hitting the Gulf, and, we got all the pandemic COVID hysteria still going on. It's quite a year, my brothers. 2020 is a doozy, and we're still not even done yet, and we still got an election to go. But it's just, it's very smoky out here. We were going to go camping this weekend, but we weren't able to because it was just, I can't take the bairns, can't take the babes out in the air quality like this. It's not good for the health. A couple other friends went anyway because they're not young babies and they don't have young babies, and so they said it wasn't too bad. But still, this is just crazy, and it's building to a crisis point. I mean, it's been a crisis for a long time, but sometimes, especially in liberal states, especially California, it takes like subsequent years and decades of growing crises to actually make a decision happen. But that being said, I was very, very pleased to see yesterday that the state of California and the feds via United States Forest Service are partnering to remove essentially 1 million acres of forest thinnings per year for the next 20 years to be updated in every 5 years. This is absolutely what we have needed for a long time, and it's kind of, there was a $10 billion bill signed last month by Trump that allocates money to the national parks and can be used for forest thinnings. The thing is, I grew up in Tahoe where they did forest thinnings a lot, and the reason that they burn it there on the ground is because there's not really a lumber sale value. It's a lot of just small pieces, and so it's not like you can make boards out of it or different larger pieces of wood for manufacture or for industry or construction. And so it's basically just biomass, but so they burn it there in the forest. But we can take all of that biomass and we can run biomass electric generators. We can have power plants that produce electricity via biomass. We can make biofuels via pyrolysis and a number of different other technologies. All of these things are well developed and commercialized technology to some degree. Pyrolysis is, at least over the last decade since I started researching the technology, is now at the commercial level. There are companies who basically go into refineries, full-on petroleum refineries, and add on, somewhere between 5 to 10% of bio-oil feedstock. And so we can essentially, that number can be adjusted, especially over time with a coherent policy. We can absolutely, make it oil, and everything we make downstream from oil, from the adhesives to the paints and the solvents and the fuels, of course, liquid fuels, gas, diesel, jet fuel, all of these things we can make from agricultural sources via bio-oil. And it's actually a fairly simple process. I mean, of course, it takes capital costs to invest, but so does everything else. But, California is only just now realizing that that there are consequences to this whole green energy push at the expense of other priorities, right? People want to blame the utility. Oh, PG&E made a corporate decision not to maintain these lines. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Well, the reason they only have so much money. Again, liberals failed to recognize at a certain point that even large corporations have a limited amount of money, and so unless you're tied to the Fed, primary dealers, and then you've got an infinite amount of money. Just see Tesla and the Fab Five of all the tech stocks, right? They've got their drip hooked up right to the Fed, and there's just money pouring in. But in any case, even though PG&E was a large corporation, they also have billions and billions of dollars of overhead every year, and we're talking about thousands of miles cumulatively of transmission lines, many of which are older than 100 years old, and they don't even know how old many of them are. And so it takes a significant amount of resources to patrol those lines and to make sure that they are clear and to actually perform the clearing when it is needed. But if you're commanded by law to invest also billions and billions of dollars in renewable energy sources. And again, I'm all about renewable energy, except for most forms of the windmills. I absolutely hate those, and they're terrible sources of electricity. But distributed wind power, maybe, if you could have kind of a balloon that you went up, and had a conductive line coming down, and it just spun around even in a light breeze, right? Just to complement sort of a home solar setup, But anyway, getting off tangent, the point is that the state compelled, by all the guns of the state, that PG&E and the utilities had to invest in renewable capacity, and with the ostensible goal of being 100% renewable by the year 2045. And, that seems like a long time ago, but it was 25 years ago, and 1995 doesn't sound like that, I guess it was a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago in, construction and industrial scales. It takes a long time to get projects started, especially large, mass-scale industrial projects, especially energy, because rather than going with Nikola Tesla's conception, we went with the Edison conception and just made all these large conductive wires with tremendous, losses along the way, rather than using the Earth as a conductor. But anyway, I've talked a lot about that, and we'll talk more about it. The point in this video is that in their misguided attempt to solve global warming and prevent the carbons from reaching the atmospheres, they have essentially completely sacrificed and compromised the absolutely life-saving, life and death issue of clearing the lines, making sure they are clear. And, so that's just one thing, right? These fires right now, as far as I know, were not started by any of the power lines. This was from the Earth power lines, right? The grand conductor, right? Of these dry storms coming through, and, there's no rain, but there's all this crazy lightning, massive lightning in the Bay Area about a week ago. And, it just ignites all this fuel that's sitting on the forest floor. So even if we were to address the power line issue, there's still the issue of the fuel loading in the forest. And so we really have to address that issue. It will take, state and federal response. And, for the most part, there are programs already in place, small programs that, to my knowledge, are being taken advantage of, but not on a mass scale. This needs to be really ramped up. But for both the feds and the state, the feds own 58% of California's forests, and a significant proportion of the forest is also privately held, and less than 500 acres. It's basically a lot of retirees and people living out in the forest, and they don't have the resources to necessarily do all this fire cleaning. And even if they did, there's all these environmental permit regulations that makes it very burdensome, in addition to being cost intensive. So if we could streamline this and say that, all right, the priority of the gray spotted owl and the three-toed newt need to take a backseat to human lives and the burning down of our state. And we have to understand that fire is a natural part of the ecosystem. The reason that the forests are so overloaded with fuel right now is because we've repressed the fire. We've put out fires, for 100 years. And so, whereas before it was millions of acres per year that would burn as just a natural course, it's been less than that for many, many decades. And so, the timber stands have increased, so they're much more dense forests. And so when fire does come through, it burns very quickly. And because the smaller fires weren't allowed to run through and clear out the lower canopy, when the fire does start, it goes right up to the tops of the trees and it basically becomes a running crown fire and just takes out everything in its path, in seconds. And this is going to get worse before it gets better, I'm afraid. We've got another dry lightning storm coming in, I think, today, going into tomorrow, so it's likely that more fires are going to start. Gavin Newsom has called in help from Canada and it was some other place, but Colorado, I guess, Oregon and Canada. And, it's been declared an emergency by Trump. Even Gavin Newsom, basically in his commie corrupt ways, has to acknowledge and did acknowledge that every time he's gotten on the phone with Trump, Trump has basically had a basically instantaneous response and has been very active in that. So, the screeching liberals will always try and blame every single thing on Trump, everything Trump's fault. But, it's, again, the symbol of strong leadership is being able to work with people in emergency situations, even if you vehemently disagree with them. And we work with people in business situations, even if you vehemently disagree with them. That's what it means to live in a civilized society. But, in other places, that's not necessarily such a value anymore. Take a look at Portland, right? We've got full-on LARPing commies just forming battle lines with shields and everything, and the Proud Boys are down there, and it's like, 2018 all over again. And, it's just a crazy time. It really feels like, we are entering this mitosis of worlds, this later anaphase where the worlds start to really split apart, and you really get the sense that one of these worlds is, progressing towards its inevitable doom and collapse. But at the same time, and what I've been harping on, there's this other world that is being born, and it is the most exciting time to be alive in all of human history if you have your eyes on the prize, which is to say building a human civilization that actually is prosperous and free and secure and meaningful and brings a great joy to its inhabitants. And we can absolutely rebuild this planet. We can totally reform our entire electrical system, our entire transportation system, to the point where we don't need a global government. We don't need a carbon tax in order to make a world that actually values the environment being clean. Again, it's like, as Ben Davidson at Suspicious Observers harps on, just because we are challenging the fraudulent science of anthropogenic global warming and climate change, that doesn't mean that we automatically just don't support and keeping the environment clean. It's just funny because all the other real environmental priorities and concerns have been totally railroaded by anthropogenic global warming and the climate cult. It's like nothing else matters except for carbon dioxide. At the same time, they will never admit that carbon dioxide is the basis of all life on this planet. It is plant food, and that as a result of the higher carbon dioxide concentrations, we now have essentially multiple United States areas worth of new forests over the last couple decades because the trees can actually breathe a little deeper. And so, by that token, I would hope to really pump up the CO2 in the atmosphere. What they are trying to restrict, I would probably just encourage. It gives us more of a carbon buffer in the atmosphere. If we have solar-driven cooling, it would be better to have a greater carbon buffer. If there is a greenhouse effect, then let's utilize it. Let's make this house a greenhouse. What about the word greenhouse suggests that, it's dire and life-threatening? A greenhouse sounds like a nice place. It's where plants grow. It allows plants to grow in places where they otherwise might not grow very well. And we're afraid of turning our planet into a greenhouse? Again, assuming that all of the science is legit, which it's not. But we've already gone into that numerous times, and, there's a certain point where you realize this is not about argumentation, this is not about presentation of the facts. This really is a cultural, psychic, and spiritual battle. And so, when a person wakes up to that reality, they see all of the true science and the true state of things almost instantaneously. Again, it's like Plato's allegory of the cave. They come out into the sunlight and they see what the true forms are, and they realize they were lied to about virtually everything when they were down in the cave. And simultaneously realize that, the controllers down in the cave, they know that, there is the sunlight above, but they willfully deceive. They willfully create a false world for the sake of their own control and rulership within that fallen realm. And so it has been on this planet, but now people are coming out into the sunlight. And again, that is Sixth World. That is what I'm trying to lead and encourage and foster and cultivate at all turns. But, at the same time, Fifth World is, not going to go down with just a whimper, but with a bang. And, people are getting more and more crazy. They will continue to get more crazy. And the more that basically the state burns down and there's all these natural disasters, if people are so programmed, they're going to blame all of this on, climate change. Even though, again, if you look back even on a century timeline, you realize that we are not at all the hottest we've been. The fires haven't been the most. The storms haven't been the most. But at the same time, we are entering a grand solar minimum. The sun is really going to sleep whereas it was very much awake and active during the 20th century, specifically the latter part of the 20th century, when we saw outsized heating and a lot of other, it was a very stable climate. Ironically, we will probably one day come to rue the day that we, castigated and downplayed, that climate, because it was very beneficial to us. We were able to produce tremendous amounts of food because things were, so sunny in general and warm. But when the weather turns to a sort of mini ice age, just like it did, back in the Maunder minimum and the Dalton minimum. Again, this isn't even ancient history. It's, within the last few hundred years, these things have happened, but it's only now that we have the perspective and the technology to understand the context in its full detail. And so as we go into the solar minimum, we're not just counting sunspots with a telescope, but we actually have a full electromagnetic readout of the entire, plasma structure of the sun and the endless spiral of that energy flowing out in spiral arms throughout the solar system. And so we know that things are happening. We know that, also the sun is connected to the galaxy via channels of electric current, Birkeland currents. And so, one of our subscribers left a comment, and then he deleted it. I'm not sure why, but he was asking about, is this planet heading towards, something else in the galaxy? Is something on its way? And well, yes, it's true. I mean, something's always on its way. Everything is in constant flux. But what we're likely approaching is the sort of galactic ecliptic, right? The current sheet. That just like there's the plane of inertia, right, and the cosmic structure of the toroid and the hyperboloid. There's the up triangle, the down triangle, or the up cone and the down cone, and then there's the spiral disk, and that disk is aligned with the plane of inertia. And that is essentially, the galaxy has that, and we, the Earth, in moving around the galaxy, it doesn't just go straight across, it goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down. And so as the course of that up and down, it at certain points crosses the galactic current sheet. Just like within the solar system, again, the sun has that flow as well, and when we switch between the different current sheets, that's often a time that correlates with a lot of earthquakes and large earth changes. And so one of the things that we're expected to see as a result of this whole grand solar minimum and a reduced sort of electrostatic pressure coming from the sun via the solar wind is that the Earth actually starts to discharge, right? Instead, like lightning comes down to Earth, but it also goes up from Earth. And we're seeing a lot more of the lightning from Earth upward. And so, it's looking like the Earth is already beginning its Earth discharge phase, which is a sign that the grand solar minimum is proceeding very quickly. And, as Ben Davidson suggested, he's like, I didn't expect this for another, decade, but the fact that it is moving now indicates, where we were at, and maybe we're being a little too optimistic with our few decades timeline before this gets real. And if history is any guideline, Chinese empires have fallen. There's been large geopolitical changes in response to the collapse of food production. And so it is very important that we manage our resources very effectively, and we can't be dealing with absolutely cockamamie, bullshit priorities like investing in technology to reduce carbon, right? It is completely stupid. And for every dollar that we take away from actually clearing the forests and clearing the power lines and investing in our response technology of how we can actually form a decentralized, resilient grid, then we are absolutely shooting ourselves in the foot, and not just ourselves, but our children and our children's children, because for every moment that we don't act now, to borrow a line from the climate cultists, it's like, we're basically selling our children down the river. But luckily, I am not that person. I am not that brainwashed fool who accepts what the media tells me and spoon feeds it, without question. I used to be a climate cultist back in high school when I assumed that, my teachers were telling me the truth. And then it was later, I started watching Suspicious Observers, and I realized, wow, there's a lot more factors and variables in the climate than I really apprehended when I, thought about this whole global warming thing. And it's really an electric system. And so there's all these electric inputs, and it's such a complex system. And the idea that you could reduce that climate system to a simple computer model and say that model hinged on the input of one gas out of almost like infinite different permutations of gases and densities and, you know, basically orbital charge configurations and whatnot. This one gas is the one that it's the control knob for the entire climate. If you turn it up a little bit, then the whole thing falls apart. Like, do you realize how absurd that is just a priori via logic and induction alone? It is completely insane, because the Earth would not have made it this far. It would have basically, it's a self-correcting system, not a, a wild system that explodes as soon as one variable gets slightly, higher elevated. And so that's essentially where we're at in this state. Again, it's very, very encouraging to me to see that the crisis moment has finally broken and the feds and the state are actually working to remove the forest thinnings. Now it's up to the private industry, and entrepreneurs to find ways to utilize that biomass and create useful things, whether it's just basic electricity or biofuels or biochar so we can remediate the soils as well. All these things, renewable building materials, stronger and lighter than steel. This is the new American industry that will come back now that we're decoupling from China. We're not going back to Rockefeller and, Carnegie for this new phase. We're going to, a very new and exciting time. Thunder Slice Enterprise, if you will. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of it. It's hard to believe at a certain point that people still believe it, but again, it's media programming, it's a social thing. If these people actually read, data and actual science, like they're always claiming to be in favor of science, right? These dumb Republicans believe in the creation of the universe. They're so dumb. And, but men can also menstruate, right? And, it's a cliche on the red team at this point, but it's still valid. I mean, these people are in these cities, in these urban environments, drinking these endocrine disruptors, taking all these chemicals into their body that mess with their hormones, and they're fed this media program. They're getting hit with electromagnetic fields, totally destructive orgone fields that are, warping their entire psychology and, removing their anchor to that natural electric grounding connection. So, everything is proceeding apace for fifth world and sixth world. And I, again, will continue to reiterate the importance of remembering that as one world dies, another world is born. And the world that is being born is worth so much more than the world falling away. And yes, there will be casualties and there will be losses and damages. And especially when the great, the real natural disasters come, like, it seems like they may be starting now. We always have the power to rebuild, and we can always rebuild better than it was. And we should never let despair take us, like kids now have mental problems. They have depression and nightmares because of this whole climate cult. And it is totally devoid of reality and actual scientific basis. And I can go through every single line item and data point, but it doesn't matter. It's a cultural, psychic, and spiritual phenomenon. And so we need to engage on that level. Otherwise, our results will not bear fruit. And, basically, we will see. But it's now, again, it's time for people to really take up the banner and find uses for this biomass and take advantage of the momentum that we now have built through successive years of crisis. And, hopefully we'll create the state of Jefferson while we're at it, because, California, the idea of California engaging on a sensible and, and logical path forward is kind of hard for me to fathom at this point. But then again, like I said in the last video, things that are inevitable or things that are impossible formerly are becoming inevitable due to the phase change and paradigm shift that is happening. It's important not to be overly optimistic and say, oh, everything's rosy, when in fact, many things are not rosy. But also, again, even the things that are not rosy, if you have the capacity to respond, if you have trained yourself psychologically, psychically, and physically and emotionally, you have nothing to fear. You have only to be in that heightened state of awareness where you're capable of responding if needed. And, if needed is likely to become a lot more needed in the near future. So that's my video today. Hope you guys are having a good one, and I will see you next time. Cheers.